Imagine waking up one day to find out that your government, the one that's supposed to protect you, had been secretly conducting experiments for years in a quest to control the human mind. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, right? But in this case, it's true. What I'm talking about is a CIA's MKUltra program, an almost unbelievable series of experiments aimed at finding a way to control people's thoughts, their actions, and even their deepest fears. Today, we're taking a deep dive into one of the darkest chapters of the Cold War, when paranoia about communism drove the United States to the brink of ethical collapse. Strap in, because this is a wild ride through mind control, secret detention centers, acid trips, and a desperate search for a superweapon that ultimately ended up backfiring in the most unexpected ways. This is MKUltra, the CIA's mind control experiment. Our story begins in the early 1950s. Picture this. It's the height of the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union are in a massive power struggle for global dominance, and both sides are looking for any advantage they can get. This was a time when people feared that the enemy was lurking around every corner, and nothing seemed more terrifying than the possibility that the Soviets had figured out how to control human minds. The CIA, always on the cutting edge of intelligence work, became obsessed with the idea that the communists had discovered a drug, a technique, or a method for controlling thoughts and behavior. In 1953, the CIA officially launched MKUltra under the direction of a man named Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist with a twisted sense of scientific ambition. Gottlieb was given an extraordinary level of freedom and access to resources to pursue one goal: find a way to control human behavior. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The thought was, if the Soviets could master mind control, they could turn people into unwitting spies, agents, or even assassins. The CIA wanted to get there first. Who was Sidney Gottlieb? Well, he was more than just a scientist. He was the man at the center of MKUltra, the architect behind some of the most chilling experiments in American history. Gottlieb wasn't your typical government official. He had a background in chemistry and pharmacology, and when he joined the CIA, he quickly became known for his willingness to push ethical boundaries. You could say he was the CIA's mad scientist, but this wasn't a cartoon villain. We're talking about real-life human suffering on a large scale. Gottlieb's idea of mind control involved two major steps. First, he aimed to destroy the human mind, erase it, so to speak. Imagine wiping away everything that makes you you. Your memories, your personality, your sense of reality. Second, he hoped to insert new thoughts, beliefs, or behaviors into that blank slate. The first part, destroying the mind, was the part that MKUltra spent the most time on, using methods that ranged from drugging people with LSD to isolating them in sensory deprivation tanks for days or even weeks. Now, it's important to remember that not everyone who participated in these experiments was a willing volunteer. Some of the most disturbing experiments took place in prisons, hospitals, and even overseas detention centers, where the subjects often had no idea what was being done to them. Gottlieb and his team would drug these unsuspecting individuals with high doses of LSD, sometimes for days on end. If you think a bad acid trip sounds scary, imagine being kept in a continuous drugged state while doctors poked, prodded, and observed your reactions. One of the more famous cases involved a man named Whitey Bulger. Before his days as a notorious crime boss, he was serving time in a federal prison. Bulger volunteered for what he thought was a study aimed at curing schizophrenia. But instead of finding a cure, Bulger was given LSD every day for more than a year. That's right, over 365 consecutive days of hallucinogenic drugs. He later described the experience as feeling like he was losing his mind, and said he was used as a human guinea pig in a government experiment. And here's where the irony comes in. The drug that the CIA hoped would be the key to controlling people actually ended up fueling a cultural revolution that sought to liberate people. Through its experiments, the CIA essentially introduced LSD to the broader American public. When Gottlieb first brought the drug to the US in the early 50s, he bought up the world's entire supply of LSD and began shipping it to universities, hospitals, and even prisons under the guise of scientific research. Unbeknownst to the CIA, their efforts to discover the mind control properties of LSD ended up planting the seeds for the counterculture movement. Yes, the very drug they hoped would control people's minds ended up freeing them from traditional societal expectations. Figures like Ken Casey, the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and poets like Allen Ginsberg caught their first taste of LSD from these CIA-sponsored studies. Even members of the Grateful Dead were involved in CIA-linked experiments. The drug that was supposed to turn people into mindless drones instead inspired a generation to question authority and challenge the status quo. Now that's irony. But the story doesn't stop there. You see, MKUltra wasn't just inspired by science fiction. It was also disturbingly linked to real wartime atrocities. Some of the techniques used in MKUltra had their roots in experiments conducted by Nazi doctors and Japanese scientists during World War II. And if that isn't horrifying enough, the CIA actually hired some of these individuals as consultants to build on their research. That's right, the CIA brought in war criminals, people who had performed human experimentation in concentration camps and POW camps, to advise them on how to refine their own methods of breaking the human mind. They even experimented with mescaline, a psychedelic drug used by Nazi doctors at Dachau, and conducted tests with sarin gas, a deadly nerve agent. This wasn't just an academic exercise. It was a full-fledged effort to unlock the darkest secrets of human consciousness at any cost. One of the more terrifying aspects of MKUltra was the way the CIA operated almost without any oversight. They set up secret detention centers in countries like Japan, Germany, and the Philippines, where they conducted experiments on what they called expendable individuals. These were often enemy agents, or simply people who had the misfortune of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The goal was to break these subjects through extreme techniques, using drugs, electroshock, isolation, and even sleep deprivation to see if they could destroy a person's sense of self. The human cost was staggering. We don't know exactly how many people died, but the number of lives permanently damaged is undeniably high. Gottlieb and his team operated with near-complete autonomy. They didn't have to report their findings to anyone in detail. They were given a blank check and told to do whatever was necessary, even if that meant pushing people to the edge of insanity or beyond. When the program finally started to unravel in the early 70s, the CIA scrambled to cover its tracks. Sidney Gottlieb and his patron Richard Helms, who was then the director of the CIA, decided to destroy all the evidence. Gottlieb drove out to the CIA's records center himself and ordered the incineration of thousands of documents. They thought they could erase the past by literally burning it, but some documents survived. Those surviving documents, coupled with testimonies from people involved, gave us a glimpse into what MKUltra had been doing for nearly 2 decades. It wasn't until congressional hearings in the mid-1970s that the public started to get a sense of the true scope of MKUltra. The hearings revealed a program that had gone wildly out of control, with almost no ethical boundaries and virtually no oversight. People were shocked to learn that their government had not only been experimenting on unsuspecting citizens, but had done so in ways that defied all ethical standards. The outrage was immediate, and rightly so. For many, MKUltra was a betrayal of trust, a glimpse into just how far the government was willing to go in its search for power and control. The revelations sparked a major outcry and led to reforms intended to prevent similar abuses in the future. The CIA was forced to tighten its policies and procedures regarding human experimentation. and the government introduced stricter laws governing the use of experimental drugs and techniques on human subjects. Despite these efforts, the damage was already done. The full extent of the program and the lasting effects on its victims remain hard to quantify. Many of the people who underwent the experiments struggled with psychological issues for the rest of their lives, haunted by the trauma of what had been done to them without their consent. Some MKUltra survivors spent decades trying to piece their lives back together, while others never found peace. And let's not forget about those whose lives were lost along the way. People who were written off as expendable in the pursuit of what seemed at the time like an ultimate goal. A goal that was in the end never achieved. As for Sidney Gottlieb, the man who orchestrated this dark chapter in American history, he quietly retired from the CIA in 1973. His career ended with the destruction of most MKUltra records, and he managed to avoid facing any real consequences for his actions. He lived out his later years on a farm, embracing a simpler, more reclusive lifestyle. It's a chilling thought, how a man responsible for some of the most inhumane experiments of the 20th century could just fade into obscurity without ever being held accountable. In 1977, another round of Senate hearings sought to bring more clarity to the extent of MKUltra. New documents that had survived the original purge were uncovered, and more details emerged about just how deep the program ran. The hearings confirmed the worst fears, that the government had indeed crossed ethical lines in ways most people couldn't even imagine. In the end, MKUltra became a sobering lesson on the dangers of unchecked power. It serves as a grim reminder that when governments operate in the shadows without accountability, they can become a threat to the very people they're supposed to protect. So, what does MKUltra teach us? It teaches us that even the most secretive programs eventually come to light, that justice, while delayed, is always pursued, and that we must stay vigilant against abuses of power. Thanks for tuning in. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into history's hidden stories. Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay aware.